Good afternoon, Mike Winkler here. I wanted to try something a little different today. We've spent a lot of time in this video series talking about products that have all been very security intelligence related and things that were very tool related. Today I wanted to talk about some ideas, things that make you think. In this case, the illusion of zero. The idea that there's a start point from which we can objectively measure tools and destinations and ideas against each other, and how this isn't necessarily as valid as it seems to be on the surface. Okay, so just as an example, let's take London and Paris. Very known commodities. We've known about them for hundreds of years. They haven't moved. There's been some bits and pieces of change as time goes by, but really, they're static known places at a static distance. But let's be a little more precise, right? More than just London and Paris. I want to say Big Ben to the Eiffel Tower, a very known distance. So I went and looked this up. Okay, and that's 469 kilometers. A pretty decent distance there, right? So okay, if you wanted to travel from one to the other, you know where you're starting, you know where you're ending, you have some good ideas on conditions. So it should be a very, very predictable experience going from one to the other, right? So you could take the train. Takes about an hour. It's nice. You just buy a ticket and you go. If you have the right passport, that goes very quick. The wrong passport, that's going to slow you down a lot. What if you had to walk, right? Because this could take you much longer. Goes from something you mark on your clock to something you mark on your calendar. And even then, you'd have to deal with crossing the English Channel, which is a no joke of a swim. Things can turn to very long times indeed, right? But what if you had a rescue helicopter, right? One of those pieces of high priority traffic that you go first, this suddenly gets to be a very short trip. Okay, so this relatively silly example, I wanted to point out, even when you know where you start and you know where you're finishing, there can be an awful lot of variables in our idea, right? So, I mean, a lot of the time we're doing IT, we're doing data security projects, we have experience, we got good tools, we know where we're starting, we think we know where we're finishing, but so often where we set out for is not where we actually land in the end, right? So this particular case is the idea of what does travel time even mean, right? Okay, fair enough. A couple other examples, also a little on the silly side, is if we have a road race and we have a couple of guys out running, this should be a pretty serious level playing field here. Got a couple of runners, got an open road. They're going to go and we're going to see who goes first. But what if you're a little less prepared than the other guy or less prepared than you thought you were? Or maybe you aren't as good at this as you once were, right? And you've let your skills slip a little bit. And maybe there's some variety of hazards you haven't thought of yet between yourself and the finish line. But, the baby might get eaten by the Tyrannosaurus and those athletic men in the left might just get by. But it does make you ask the question, what does a level playing field mean? Right? What's level for our athletes in the upper left may not be as level for the infant or for the fat guy. Okay, so I'm going to give you one more example here before I kind of get to my point, is the age-old question. I don't care who your grandpa is or if you're the grandpa in this picture. Everybody has the argument with their grandpa about whether it was easier back in the old days, right? And in my case, my dad could buy a brand new car for $4,000, right? Which is laughable by the modern era, right? So that sounds like, everyone would have a brand new car, but then, the old guy is going to say, you have an all-knowing device in your pocket, all information at your fingertips all the time. But this goes to beg the question, and we could come up with data points for this one all afternoon. What does easier mean, right? So there's lots of interesting questions about what it means for a thing to be easier. So kind of equating this to our data security school of thought or our IT thinking altogether. So it's 2019 and we say, what does privacy even mean, right? There's all kinds of questions about privacy. Are things authenticated? Are they encrypted? Who has access to the keys? Who has access that probably shouldn't, right? You're following the news at all in the last few months. You see an awful lot of access to data that people aren't supposed to have. Companies have been lying to us all up and down the map. And the answer is, oh, sorry. So who has access that probably shouldn't? When we're considering our privacy, we need to look at our relationship with the businesses around us that are different than they were even a few years ago. And they ask the question, what does security mean, right? Does it conflict with privacy? There's been a lot of noise in the last couple of years about how privacy versus security, and they don't need to conflict. That's just how we've let the argument be framed. We can have security and privacy that are riding along the same trail perfectly in harmony, but it requires us to look at them differently. Who needs access versus who wants it, right? That's age old. That hasn't changed much. But we can ask the question of who just wants it and who we tended to give into. How much restriction versus how much convenience, on and on. The idea of what should we not bother trying to secure is a very modern idea. The answer of you secure everything as much as you can, as well as you can, as often as you can. But when is it you just say, you know what? Gonna let that go because I can spend a bunch of cycles on something that's going to be a wasted effort. How do we write policy? And because these are some very daunting concepts. These are some challenging changes in the way we want to think. Write policy that doesn't convict with privacy, like I was talking about a couple of minutes ago, and how not make your company look like a bad guy. We have watched some of the big, fun companies in America that have turned into the villain one day to the next over a bad policy. And, you know, guys like Target end up spending millions and millions of dollars to get out from underneath that bad guy stigma. It's a real question. When is it worth it to be proactive? When is it better to fast react? This is not the same argument as it was a couple of years ago, because there's things you can't per se prevent, or if you do, it's an immense amount of disruption and expense that are pretty darn easy to cure, right? The whole idea of privilege escalation precedes the vast number of intrusions. If I can allow the privilege escalation to happen, and then before it goes through and someone does anything bad with the privilege escalation, I dump it, it's sometimes better to be fast reacting than to be proactive. How do we even start with this, right? I mean, this is a lot of, oh man, if we need to rethink everything we've done since the start, do not let analysis paralysis get to you. Even with kind of standard thinking, the kind of IT departments I've been talking to for years on end, there's a lot of analysis paralysis and people who don't have enough appetite for risk or a true aversion to risk, even when it's going to help them. Not having an aversion to risk is often the biggest thing you can do to be thinking in kind of a proactive curve, to questioning all the old answers. The idea that we need to start the race before we know where the finish line is, and run with me on this, to know that we don't know. Yeah, you're going to start some IT projects. You're going to start some security projects. You don't know who the bad guys are. It hasn't been revealed yet, right? If you wait until you know who the bad actors are and what the attacks are, the solution you're building is already obsolete. So it really kind of comes down to the point, be prepared to adapt without losing strategy. You have to be able to have your eye on your best guess of the goal without knowing the goal and be able to adapt in your way there. This is a different way of thinking. But I think if we could get to moving in this direction, that any IT or any security threat that comes off at us, we're going to be an awful lot better equipped to deal with. I am Mike Winkler, and this has been Just Something to Think About.